Hello and welcome to Spotlight North Carolina Cooperative Extension. I'm your host, Rebekah Benton. North Carolina Cooperative Extension is comprised of two land-grant universities, NC State University and NC A&T State University. We are located in all 100 counties, including the Koala boundaries. Now today, I have with me Lydia Miles, field crops agent from Columbus County. Lydia, thank you for being on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I am Columbus County's field crops agent. So I work primarily with large-scale farmers growing corn, soybean. We still have some tobacco farmers left. Sweet potatoes, wheat, small grains, things of that nature. But I also handle ponds in the county for usually homeowners, some larger scale places, but those are my programmatic areas.
And so today we're actually going to be talking about pondweed, right?
Right.
Now, is there a variety of pondweeds? Oh, so we can get into depth about this.
Yeah.
Tell me what, you said normally your audiences are farmers and some
homeowners. Farmers for all my field crops, but ponds are usually homeowners. Every now and again we'll have a subdivision or something that has some larger ponds come in, but we have a really large amount of small ponds within the county, just little ponds that people have on their properties for fishing and recreation and things like that.
I have seen some of those driving around the county, and I was like, ooh, that looks like a little
know.
cute lagoon or something going on. So tell me a little bit about your background specifically with ponds.
Sure. I actually did not have much of a background before starting with Extension. My primary background is in field crops. I got a bachelor's in agronomy from Clemson with a minor in plant pathology, and I'm working on my master's with NC State in soil science. So my pond background is a little bit different, but it actually ties in very well to the agriculture because a lot of what we deal with ponds is issues with fertilization and weeds and things of that nature. And to handle those, you know, it's the same kind of chemical background and soil sampling background that we use in agriculture. So it's really meshed very well together and kind of brought everything full circle. So I've gotten a lot of experience in my last 5 years as the field crops agent, diving headfirst into helping our community with pond issues. It's been a great experience.
Now, are these ponds that you normally work with, I'm just curious, are they normally like home maintained ponds where people do for recreation or swimming or fishing?
Right.
Okay, so that is the most, okay.
It's generally, you know, we've seen several people have an interest in having a company manage their ponds, but there's not really a whole lot of options for that locally, at least that I'm aware of. And so generally homeowners are maintaining their ponds on their own. And they don't usually come to me until they have an issue. So everything's going great, there's no need, but then they have a weed that pops up and takes over half their pond, or the pond turns green and goopy, or sometimes we even see things like a fish kill, which can be really shocking when you come out and see a whole bunch of your fish that you've been feeding and taking care of no longer with us anymore and floating.
That could be, especially if you have little ones or something that's going out there to feed them, absolutely. So who is the typical clients that need help with pondweed again?
Generally homeowners. Generally homeowners' ponds are smaller. We have a lot of small, shallow ponds in the county, which there's nothing wrong with that.
When you say shallow, what do you mean? Like how deep is
just
shallow?
Just a lot less than 10 feet even. A lot that are pretty shallow, less than 10 feet, and that's at the deepest point, so then you bank up from there, and that's as far as ponds go, that's pretty shallow. And a lot of our issues come from being shallow. When you have a pond that's so shallow, light can really penetrate all the way down to the bottom of the pond. And when it can penetrate down to the bottom of the pond, it can actually help certain weeds germinate and grow up and really thrive. Plus, you're going to get a little bit warmer water temperature than you would with a deeper pond. And that's going to help the algae and the weeds flourish.
So what are the common questions you get when folks call?
Sure. A lot of times, I've got a weed, what do I do? Or I've got algae, what do I do? And the first thing we always want you to do is bring us a sample. And it can be any type of jar, bottle, anything. Just make sure you get a good bit of what you think your problem is, whether it's the weed, the algae, whatever it is. You bring it to us in the office. where I'm able to identify it. A lot of times we have people who think they have a weed and it's actually a type of algae, and vice versa. So really it's best for us just to get a hands-on identification. Then once we know what's going on, in almost every situation I'm going to recommend a water sample. So generally when you come to us with your weed for identification, if you want to go ahead and be proactive and ready to start the process, you'll bring me your weed in one jar for me to identify, and you can take that jar home with you. So if it's a mason jar or anything like that, no worries. And then in an empty drinking bottle, even like a 16 or 20 ounce water bottle or soda bottle, you get a water sample, and that sample doesn't need to have any of the weed or algae because we're just testing your water parameters. The reason we do this is we can take care of weeds and algae all day long, but we want to make sure that we know the root cause for the issue and that we can take care of that, because if we don't take care of the key cause of the algae or the weeds, then we're kind of just putting a Band-Aid on it. So the water sample gives us good insight into that. It lets us look at nutrients and see if the nutrient levels in your pond are too high, and that can create an algae bloom or can over-fertilize weeds. And it also lets us check the pH. We're in an area where we generally need to lime our soils, like in our gardens. Everyone limes their soils. But we also have to lime our ponds because the soil from the bottom will leach up into your pond and alter that pH. And especially with taking care of algae, if your pH isn't exactly right, it can bind up with the algicide and effectively render it useless. So we got a few steps to take before we
money
add.
wasted, basically.
Right, totally, money wasted. And we don't want to add any more chemicals than we have to, of course, especially with fish and when people want to swim in their ponds and things like that. So first step's always identification sample for me to identify the issue, and a water sample for us to send off. If that water sample comes back saying that your pH isn't right, then we have to take one step further and do a soil sample, because we actually cannot figure out how much lime to add to the pond based off of the pH of the water. We have to get the pH of the soil and the alkalinity of the soil.
Do you do the soil sample from the deepest part, the shallowest part, or just somewhere in your yard?
So kind of like you do a field or your garden, you take several samples throughout the lake, or the pond. What we tell people is, if you've got a boat, perfect, put your little boat or your float out and attach a can to a pole and kind of scoop up soil from several areas throughout your little pond. Of course, it's not feasible for everyone, and we totally understand that. What I tell people, if you don't have a boat, if you're not able to get out on the water, go around your bank, and as close in the shallow parts of the bank, take some samples from right around there. It'll still give us a good idea of what your pH is and how much lime needs to be added to the pond before you can effectively control your issues.
Okay. Well, that sounds like, I mean, on the farmer or the homeowner's part, they do have to bring in, so they got to bring in the pond water, the weed or the cause or whatever they think it is, and soil. So do they bring all three of those in at one time, or do they usually start with the first two and then move to the third?
Usually we have people start with the first two. Right now we are in free soil sample period, so soil samples have no charge. When they do have a charge, it's only $4 for the soil sample. So right now when people are doing that, I tell them just to go ahead and, if they feel like doing the work, bring in all three, because it's not going to cost you any more.
And how long is this free soil sample period lasting?
It goes up until right about Thanksgiving, usually.
Okay.
The exact date changes, so it's important to check with us when it gets up closer to that, but usually right about then. The pond water sample does cost, and that's $5, and it's to the NCDA and CS, and they prefer check only. They don't like us to take cash for those anymore, but that would be your only charge associated with it, as long as we're in free soil sampling period.
Yeah, that sounds good. So a total of possibly $9.
Right.
But
Worst
if not,
case scenario,
worst case scenario, but best case $4. We said, wait a minute, $5. Okay, that's not too bad.
No.
So you've talked now. Have you told us about clearing up the pond?
No.
So tell me a little bit about that. How would
Sure.
you clear up a pond issue?
Sure. So it depends on if it's weeds or algae. If it's weeds, you have a couple of options. We've got, a lot of people just use Roundup for ponds, which is what most people use in their gardens, but it's the pond version.
Like Roundup, like stuff, weed control?
Yeah, like weed control.
Oh,
right.
interesting.
So your weed control for ponds, like I said, it all kind of comes back together with my ag background. It's very similar to your weed control in a field. We look a little bit more at the mechanisms behind the control, just because if you've got a weed that's submersed completely, something like Roundup won't treat it, because like in your yard, you say it kills only what it touches, right? Well, if you're spraying in a pond, if your weed is completely underwater, it's going to have no effect. So it depends on if you've got floating weeds, submersed weeds, what you want to use. There are, generally what I recommend is actually a systemic control method. It's a little bit more expensive, but the one I recommend covers a very broad variety of weeds. It takes care of your floating weeds, it takes care of your underwater weeds, and it goes through, it's systemic, so it spreads through the pond, takes care of all the weeds, and it generally provides about season-long control, as opposed to something that's contact, like your Roundup, and you're going to have to go back and continue to retreat. But it depends on the extent of the problem that you're facing too. If you've just got a few weeds around the edge of your pond, we don't need to do something as drastic as a systemic treatment. So that's why we say bring it in, talk to us about the problem. If it's something you're really not sure about, or you've got a big variety of issues, I'm happy to go on site and take a look at your pond for you. If it's algae, generally what we recommend is a copper-based algicide. They work very well. We need to check the pH first, because if you just apply the algicide without checking it, it is a waste of money, but also copper will build up in your pond, and that can be bad for the fish. So it's fine for the fish to just do it once. That's why we take the water sample, we get the problem cleared up, everything's good to go. We don't worry about it in that case. But
now, what about fertilizing?
Right. So fertilizing is another thing. I like to take a water sample first. A lot of people like to fertilize their ponds just to make sure that it's a healthy ecosystem, everything's at correct levels, and it allows their fish to flourish. Everyone wants big fish for their pond.
Of course.
So, but once we get your water sample results, I'm able to look at it and make recommendations for whether or not you need to fertilize, and if you do need to, exactly what you should apply to the pond.
Okay. Now, I'm just curious, what kind of fish are people stocking these ponds with around here?
Oh, all kinds of things. Carp, a lot of people are stocking with carp. There's also something called a triploid grass carp, which takes care of weeds, a lot of weeds. So, you don't have to go the chemical route. There are other routes to weed control that you can use, mechanical methods, cultural methods, fish being one method, to help take care of your issues. We can approach it from a variety of different angles.
It sounds like it's kind of really up to the homeowner, how they want to approach it and 100%. How much money they want to put in it, or how least amount they want to put in it.
Right. We can go from each angle and figure out what works for you, what works for your pond and your operation, and approach it like that.
That's it. This has been some great, helpful information. Like I said, I knew nothing about ponds, or even thought that people that had, these ponds at homeowners had weeds in them or any issues like that. I would just, like I said, it's not my area of expertise, but you have definitely educated me on it today, so I'm really excited. Is there anything else you would like to share with us today about ponds?
No, I think if you have a question or if you are unsure, it's best to always feel free to come talk to us. I'm in the office all week, every week, and it doesn't cost anything to ask us questions. Just want to make sure we help you make the right decision for your pond, and that way everything stays healthy. You don't have to worry about issues with swimming or fish kills or anything like that could potentially go wrong.
And Lydia, what is a way that they can contact you if they cannot come by the office or they're not sure of the address? So give us your contact information.
My email address is lydia_miles@ncsu.edu. Phone number is 910-640-6605. That email address and phone number are both also located on the Columbus County Cooperative Extension staff webpage as well.
That is true. Well, Lydia, thank you so much for being with us today. And everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Spotlight North Carolina Cooperative Extension. We expect and hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.